Hey guys, it's Nick, and, well, today was the day. It was trade deadline day. We had a long live stream today, going 7.5 hours on YouTube. That is one of my longest streams in history of the channel. And, well, I was going into this trade deadline expecting the Hawks to make quite a bit of moves on players to leave the team. Well, they only made 2 today, but in trade deadline weekend, they were able to trade out 3 players and acquire quite a bit of draft compensation for the 3 players the Hawks traded out. It was a bittersweet day, as we knew today was going to be trade deadline day and we were going to lose some players. And we were going to lose potentially a goalie, which ended up happening. The Hawks today ended up trading away Marc-Andre Fleury, and then they only traded away, out of the skaters, Ryan Carpenter. That was it. I would have thought Calvin DeHaan probably would have been gone. Maybe a Dominic Kubalik. Maybe a Dylan Strome. But they remain as Chicago Blackhawks for the potentially until the end of the year. This makes it interesting. The Hawks trade out a goalie, and what's that going to do for our goalie situation now? Because frankly, Kevin Lankinen has not been that good this year, and what we have in the AHL has not been good when they did come up in Colin Delia and Arvid Soderblom. We'll get into who becomes the backup goalie and what happens for the rest of the season later on in this video. This trade deadline, I would say, for Kyle Davidson's first deadline as a GM of the Chicago Blackhawks being part of a rebuilding team, I would probably put this at a low B. Why? The Hawks didn't do a lot of moves, but what they did, they were able to acquire draft compensation, which was key. They didn't get a lot of prospects in today's deadline, but they were able to get the future set prospects that the Hawks look to draft and by getting quite a bit of draft picks. The Hawks were able to acquire 2 first-round picks from Tampa when we traded away Brandon Hagel. We acquired a conditional pick from Minnesota for Fleury, and we acquired a 5th-round pick for Ryan Carpenter. I would say that 5th-round pick for Carpenter was kind of a waste because I feel like the Hawks should have gotten better value for the type of 5th-round pick, because they ended up trading one that was 2 years later than what the Hawks probably should have gone for. So let's get into the rest of this video on the 2 trades the Hawks made today on trade deadline day. So, the Blackhawks traded away Marc-Andre Fleury to division rival, the Minnesota Wild, at 50% retention on Flowers' contract. It doesn't really hurt the Hawks. That's $3.5 million the Hawks are paying off for the remainder of the year. Okay. They're retaining $3.5 million for the rest of the season. That's it. That doesn't matter. It's not going to hurt the Hawks in any way because we're a rebuilding team looking for the future. What was it the Hawks was able to acquire was interesting. This trade to Minnesota, we heard the speculation on Saturday when the Hawks lost to Minnesota that we could potentially be seeing Marc-Andre Fleury ending up in a Wild uniform within the next 48 hours. What happened? That actually fell out and happened. There was also another team involved where they were trying to acquire Fleury, and their GM got a little salty. We'll cover that later on in this. So what the Hawks were able to acquire from the Wild? A 2022 second round pick with compensation with it. The stipulation with this pick, it can turn into this year first round pick from Minnesota if Marc-Andre Fleury wins 4 playoff games and the Minnesota Wild move on all the way to the third round in the Western Conference Final. That's a lot of stuff the Hawks need to happen. The Wild need to win 4 games at least, and they need to make it to the conference final. That's going to be interesting to see. Will Minnesota try and pull a backstabber on the Hawks and keep it where it's a second round pick instead of the first round pick and try and bench Fleury in the playoffs so he doesn't get 4 wins? I highly doubt it. Fleury is the better of the 2 goalies in Minnesota. Minnesota now has Marc-Andre Fleury and Cam Talbot. Yes, Talbot ended up being an all-star this year, but out of the 2 goalies in a playoff run, I would take Marc-Andre Fleury any day. So Flower likely is the number 1 man in Minnesota. Hawks have to be praying for the Wild to make it to the conference final, okay, and have Fleury win 4 games in the playoffs. Okay, 4 wins in a playoff is actually an easier feat said than done, but the Wild actually have a really solid team built for this playoff run this year. So this is an interesting type of way this draft pick can change out for the Hawks for the better to get this thing to become a first round pick for this year. The Hawks don't have a first round pick, but if the Wild somehow make it to the conference final, they end up getting a first round pick, and if Fleury wins 4 games, it will turn in. So if Fleury gets 4 wins and the Wild make it to the conference final, it's a first round pick for the Chicago Blackhawks, something they need. Next up is Ryan Carpenter. He was actually linked to go to Nashville, but somehow this trade fell through apparently because he ended up going to the Calgary Flames. Carpy is a Calgary Flame. The Hawks traded away the entire contract of Carpenter. Okay, good. But the Flames are getting a good player out of Carpenter. A good bottom 6 forward who's willing to take shot blocks, hit, and play on the PK. He's a type of player that fits into the system well that the Calgary plays with. Daryl Sutter liking those work them hard, grinder type players. This is what you're going to get with Ryan Carpenter each and every night. Calgary got themselves a good player for a playoff run, in my opinion. So what did the Hawks get for Carpenter? Just a 5th round pick. A 5th round pick that isn't even for this year. It's for 2024. Yeah, 2 years from now we get this pick, but it's a 5th round pick. What the likelihood of a player coming from the 5th round into the NHL is very low, but it does happen. There has been times the Hawks draft in the 5th round and they end up with a great player. A couple players remind me from the last time this team went through a rebuild, such as Nicholas Jarmerson. But let's be honest, 5th round picks have a low chance in making the NHL, but this one's also in 2 years. Something could happen. The Hawks could end up flipping the pick and trying to make it a better pick by combining it with more, but the Hawks traded away this 5th round pick. And here's the quick recap of what the Hawks got in this week for the deadline. Hawks were able to acquire 2 first-round picks from Tampa Bay, which is a 2023 and a 2024, but those are top 10 protected by Tampa. If Tampa somehow drops into the top 10 in those 2 draft years, those years move to 2025 and 2026. Hopefully that doesn't happen. Then they got Boris Tkachuk and Taylor Radish from Tampa also, which is a good pickup for the Hawks. And from the Flames, they were able to acquire a 2024 5th-round pick, and in the Marc-Andre Fleury trade, a 2022 2nd-round pick that could turn into a 1st-round pick. Those were good pickups for the Hawks. They kind of helped themselves for rebuilding with what they've acquired. Tkachuk and Radish in the first 2 games played as a Hawk, they've looked good. So as you can tell, the Hawks got quite a bit this week, even though they made 3 trades. The deadline has passed, but what does that mean for the rest of the season? Calvin DeHaan remains with the Hawks. Okay, we get DeHaan for the rest of the year and the rest of his contract. Fine, we probably lose him at the end of that. And then, what else does this do to the Hawks? Well, the goaltending. We now no longer have Marc-Andre Fleury as our number 1 man. Who will be the number 1 goalie? That likely be Kevin Lankinen. This year, Lankinen has not been Lankinen of his rookie season last year, where Lankinen, at the first half of the season, he was viewed as a Calder favorite. And, well, frankly, that has not been Lankinen this year. He has been not good. He's been good for maybe 2 or 3 total games this entire season. I haven't seen much I've liked from Lankinen in his rebound control. He has a lot to do to try and prove he can still be a starter in the NHL. He's also a free agent at the end of the year. Do the Hawks consider re-signing him? And what does this do with the backup situation in Chicago? Lankinen was the backup this year to Marc-Andre Fleury, but now he's the number 1 guy. After all said and done, the backup is going to be Colin Delia. There was a time where Delia was viewed as an okay goalie to be a potential at starting, and that was just last year when it was Malcolm Subban, Colin Delia, and Kevin Lankinen battling for that number 1 goalie. Lankinen ended up stealing it. Delia ended up becoming a scratch pretty much as that number 3 goalie, and also played in Rockford. This year, when he's played in the Hawks uniform, he has not been good. So it's going to be interesting to see how the goalie situation goes in Chicago, because Delia and Lankinen this year, frankly, have not been good. And I get it, the Hawks are rebuilding, but it's going to be a rough go for the Hawks in the rest of this season and seasons to come. The dark days are upon us, and the rebuild is in full swing. So, down in the comments down below, I want to hear what your thoughts were on the trade deadline, and thank you for watching the broadcast. Please leave a like and subscribe if you haven't done so already, and most of all, the dark day of the Hawks are here, but hopefully it's not long. Let's go Hawks.